everybody, this is Jeff McGurn here with WineBid. Let's just say the auction is over. The gavel has fallen. We are finally hammered. I'm here with Paul Walker. Paul has been with WineBid for about 20 years now. He is an expert in wine auctions, wine retail. I would argue he's an expert in wine in general. My name is Jeff McGurn. As I said before, I work on our marketing team here at WineBid. I am just your average run-of-the-mill wino. This is our first episode of the WineBid podcast, Finally Hammered. And what we want to talk about here is really cut to the core and cover a subject that, Paul, I don't know about you, I've never really heard a podcast that talks about this subject when it relates to wine, but talk about value, right? Let's talk about, price is the four-letter word, I feel like, of the wine industry. And what we want to do is we're going to talk about price. We're going to talk about value. We're going to talk about not just inexpensive wines. We're going to talk about value in every class of wine, whether you're buying a top tier Grand Cru Burgundy, a first growth Bordeaux, whether you're buying something that's just your run of the mill drinking wine, everyday drinking wine. We want to cover what provides fantastic value and what you're going to enjoy out there for the money that we pay. The nice thing is, we have some really interesting data in front of us because we've got 26 years worth of wine auction data and pricing data that we have access to. And literally it is at our fingertips at the moment. And we're going to be talking about some of the interesting stuff that's sold at auction over the last week, some of the interesting things we're seeing at auction right now. Our auctions happen every single week. They close on Sunday nights. We also have some interesting data around some stuff that's buy now. We do have an entire buy now section. We sell a lot of wines just directly in addition to our auction wines, but we're going to be covering all that. But before we start covering that, I think we need to talk about what we're drinking right now. So Paul, what did you open up?
I am excited to tell you about it because it's been a topic of recent discussion. I'm actually having I don't know if you can see it with the camera, but La Dufesse, La Dufesse 2018, which is the baby Sassicaia that we've been singing praises about. And I believe you were outbid on a magnum of it last week.
I was. I was so upset.
It wasn't me.
That one. So I bid on that Magnum. I thought it was, I have to look at what the price was. It was a fantastic price.
I don't think it was too bad. It was like I think it hammered like only a couple bucks more than it was at 60. And I think it hammered like 62 or something. It hammered
at like 60. It was like $62 for a Magnum of baby Sassicaia, right? That was the one. I've been on a bunch of wines last week. And by the way, this podcast is incredibly dangerous because every time we do this, I go and bid on a bunch of wines and I buy a ton of wine, right? I buy a ton of wine. And so that is actually how we monetize the podcast is that Paul and I do the podcast and we buy enough wine to make it worthwhile to pay us to do the podcast.
Exactly.
It's actually revenue neutral, in addition to possibly being carbon neutral, but I haven't examined that yet. But let me just say, that was the one wine out of everything I bid on that I was most excited about. And it was the one that I got outbid on.
I'm sorry to hear that, but I got to say, I haven't tried 18 yet. This is the 18. I think there was a whole host of like all over the place vintages last week. I was going to say that I think the last vintage that I bought was 19 maybe, but I wanted to actually look it up because, I'd never tasted this vintage before. And I know that like some of them, can actually kind of need a little bit of time as far as, what like to develop. But actually I bought the 2020 off the site, a couple weeks ago for $25. And it was delicious right out the gate. Like I was kind of expecting it to be, a little bit brooding, a little bit acidic, a little bit, not showing super well, but it was fantastic. And this wine, the 18, I just cracked it like, I don't know, 15 minutes ago. It's a little wound up. I do have my baby French tasting glass, so that could, that could be part of the reason. But hey, glassware is glassware. Some people are really, really, into it. Other people don't care as much. I don't care as much, basically.
You're like your home's windows aren't made of Zolto, right? is what you're saying. So
no, stuff breaks too easily, and I don't like hand washing glasses. So
I know, like I somebody bought me a Zolto decanter, and I am like so incredibly scared to use it because I'm a big guy and I'm very clumsy and I will break everything. But I'm very jealous that you're having a de fesse.
I think it's, lait de fesse, I think.
Lait de fesse. I really wanted to try that. To me, lait de fesse is sort of like your Brunello di Montalcino has the Rosso di Montalcino,
right?
Where it's sort of like, if you want to know how the Brunello is going to be, go taste the Rosso 2 years before the Brunello comes out, right?
Right.
And some top tier producers. I mean, it's one of the, speaking about value, Rosso di Montalcino, I think, has tremendous value because it is sort of the second tier, right? But so I find that really interesting. That's why I really wanted to try the lait de fesse. But alas, I was outbid. By the way, the 18 lait de fesse, 750 milliliter. You know, it looks like the average price is like 37. So hammering it at 62 for a Magnum is an incredibly good deal.
Yeah.
That is not bad at all.
No.
Speaking of stuff that hammered, I love to look at the stuff that was the most expensive that sold. And if it's all right with you, I want to sort of dive into the really expensive stuff that sold last week.
Sure.
We had a 61 Petrus, which was a Magnum 61 1.5 liter Petrus that hammered. Well, it didn't hammer. It actually sold by now at 12,900. I don't think we move a lot of 61 Magnums of Petrus. In fact, it looks like we've only ever moved 4 of them, 3 of them, one of them twice. We've hammered it 3 times, and then we've sold it an additional time. Starting in 2003, it started at $7,000, right? It hammered at $7,000. In 2013, so a good decade later, it hammered at $16,000, right?
Yeah. I should probably jump in here and say,
please,
that this particular wine, you know, in Magnum format is, at least in external auctions, and it kind of got discounted, and it almost definitely got discounted. And part of the reason I say that is because of the condition. It has seepage. So anything that shows signs of seepage is going to be disappointing, to the point where it's not even close to sort of current external market value. You know, where we got mags hammering for much closer to like 20,000-25,000.
Let's talk about seepage for a second. Okay.
Sure.
Because I personally have had some wines that are 40, 50 years old that have had seepage, but by the way, have not been Madeirized, have not been oxidized, have been kicking and have been fantastic wines. So that in and of itself, while it can be an indication of wine quality, you know, of degraded wine quality, is not necessarily an indication of degraded wine quality, right?
True. And I think that, you know, there are certain kind of, well, first of all, older wines are more susceptible because the corks, you know, are a lot older, and not all the corks are the same. And so you're going to have problems with, you know, with seepage and depending on the quality of the cork for that particular wine and producer and everything else. Also, you know, there are sort of notorious categories of seepers. A lot of German wines are, you know, end up, once they get brought into the US, they leak either on release, or maybe you're bringing in stuff, you know, 20, 30, 40 years later and it leaks. There are some infamous Burgundy producers. I shouldn't say infamous, famous, infamous, whatever you want to call them, that tend to quote unquote overfill. And so if there's a little bit of temperature pressure variation, the cork can move a little bit and the wine seeps, you know. And so you will see examples where, you know, old ports too, a lot of old ports have leaked over the years because, you know, the corks maybe weren't super great, and you find these problems. However, that does not mean that the wine is oxidized. Sometimes it can mean that it leaked initially and then it had a great seal, and fortunately it continued its sort of slow oxidation process that the cork permits, and the wine's totally fine. I've definitely had similar examples too. One particularly memorable example was a old bottle of Oprion, a 66 Oprion, actually, that the cork had fallen almost all the way into the bottle. And so it was just barely holding on. You could see it poking down into the liquid. The fill was, I think, actually wasn't even touching liquid. The fill was terrible. But it still provided enough of a seal that it wasn't oxidized. And it was phenomenal. It was like, and those wines are like hard as nails anyway. Like Oprion is just badass. It just lasts forever and it's so damn good. So yeah, I agree with you there. I would be nervous if I saw something that had, signs of seepage that was not that old and you could see that a significant amount of wine had left the bottle.
Sure.
In which case you probably wouldn't find that on the site anyway. It would have been rejected by the inspectors, hopefully. So, you're not going to run into those kinds of problems generally. But yeah, with older wines, you're definitely going to see it from time to time. And sometimes you don't even know until you pull the capsule off and you see, there's been a little bit of, seepage through the top of the cork, but it didn't actually come down the side. And so, that's kind of the risk of old wines. That's what happens.
But that's the thing. I mean, you're paying a gamble. The bottle's discounted. That wine could be the deal of the 20th century. Right. Where you're getting something that really should have gone for $16,000, $17,000, but instead
or quite a bit more,
or even more,
2025,
2025. Instead, you're paying $12,900, right? And if the juice is good, the juice is good.
Sure.
Let's talk about some newer stuff sold at auction.
Sure.
We've got a 19 Screaming Eagle cab 3-bottle lot, right, which sold for $28.66 a bottle for $8,600. I always find it interesting when we see stuff on WineBid that is selling, that is a newer release wine, right? Yeah. When did that 2019 come out? Like that must have just come out recently.
Well, the first sale was in March of this year. And so that's an interesting wine, not just for its pedigree and its and its name and everything else, but for the fact that the price has dropped. And if you look at where it initially hammered at $94.50, $9,400, $9,450 quite a few times, it's, as much as $99.50 in May. And then, the price seemed to dip below 9,000 and $89.70, $85.95, $89.70 again. So that's an interesting example of a, extremely collectible. Everybody knows about it. It's got its fabled history, its story, everything else. But it may be an indicator of where the super premium market's going. I don't know, but it's interesting to see how things are trending in that direction, but you never know. Why did it hammer for more than it did initially in May after it had been in auction for many times? That's another thing that's always kind of interesting to me. I don't know the specific case, but it could have been a situation where there was a bidding war between a couple of people that really wanted it. And so that shot up the price, to almost 10,000, $50 away from 10 grand for a 3-pack, which is pretty wild, especially for a brand new release. Now Screaming Eagle, I think it's in a category by itself. It's kind of one of the most expensive wines out there. It's from a pretty amazing piece of ground in Oakville, but it's interesting to look at that price, that fluctuation to see if that's accounting for something going on in the general market or maybe the market at large.
And some people like their Eagle screaming, some like them more soft-spoken. We had 16 Harlan, 6-bottle case, going for $59.40. I mean, that's kind of another one where you're looking at $990 a bottle on Harlan for 16. Again, not a super old release. That one hasn't spent much time in a cellar, if at all. And you look at the price trends. 2021 in September, that 6-bottle lot OWC is going for $67.20. Now it's down to $59.40. What's interesting to me is you're seeing that from two pretty high-end Napa producers over the last year or so. You're seeing a little bit of softening in the price. Do you think this is like a trend that we're seeing? Are we seeing, could this be related to the economy? Do you think there was just a lot more demand last year in this category?
It's probably a combination of things. I'm not an economist. I have no idea. Talked to my brother about that. He's in finance. I'm not. So, it could definitely be an indicator of what's happening in the market. It could also just be sort of, wine collectors, kind of trepidation. Maybe they're concerned about the market. And so they're like, I'm going to hold off on, this purchase. And, I saw maybe, and there are definitely collectors out there that pay attention to this, and they will take a look and see what it is at auction now. They might have seen it before. They might be keeping track externally of, other auction hammers and kind of curious as to where things are going. So it's probably a combination of elements that's making it go that way. Now, if history is any indication, I would only expect this wine to, and like the Screaming Eagle we mentioned before, to gradually then, pick up steam and gain value over the next couple of years. Now there could be some, massive recession and whatever the hell else happens, but ultimately beyond that, past that, the wine will increase in value. So, and I think that is the case for a lot of the higher end wines that we see on a regular basis. The bottle, the wine right sort of next to it, as it were, that also hammered last week was a 6-pack of the 13 Coche Merceau. Yeah. Another ultra super premium producer, for lack of a better term. I kind of can't stand those corporate, wine categorizations. I can't stand them, but what the hell? It's very, very good Merceau, very, very expensive, has been very expensive for a very long time. I don't even think that actually, I think 4,400 for a 6-pack of that wine. And again, that's a buy now price. So 4,400 out the door, just no commission on top of that. It's not, not out of the range, but also maybe a little bit less than it would have hammered or sold for, 3, 6, 9 months ago. So maybe another kind of similar example. And again, another bottle right behind it was the 07 La Tâche. I was just looking at that. Hold on a second. So this breaks the mold. This breaks the mold here, because if you look at that 07 La Tâche, that started hammering in 2010 at 980, right? You look at it 2018. 2,900. You look at it 2020, 3,100. 2020 later in the year again, 6 months later, hammers at 3,290, and it hammered at 4,000. So you're seeing a steady increase on a top tier Burgundy, where we're seeing just a slight softening on some of the top tier Napa caps. That's true, and I think for La Tâche, it's again sort of its own category, right? It's extremely collectible. Again, it's not a newer or current release by any means compared to some of the other things we're talking about. And so, anytime one of these things comes up that's at least 10 or more years old, you are probably going to see active bidding activity on it. This bottle, I think, hammered at reserve, which is not too surprising. And it's kind of in line with external market rates, like external auction rates as well. I looked up just to see, what it's been going for in other examples. And I think the most recent one I saw was in September. And so it was pretty close to 5,000 for a hammer. So I think 4 is, that's a good price. It's not crazy. And so, somebody scored. You're looking well above 4. I mean, I would watch out for retail pricing. I would look for that wine, especially for DRC. I would look almost entirely only at auction, external auction. Yeah. I mean, external. Yeah. But I guess, the other thing that really struck me about this is we move this bottle a decent amount of times, right? It's been sold over the last, since 2010, it's been sold 20, 25, 27 sales. But what was really interesting to me, and what I've been looking at for a lot of the wines that we check out, not only what's the pricing trend, but how does that compare to economic conditions? So we know 2020, right? March of 2020, we had the pandemic hit and everybody shut down, right? April, May, June of 2020, you saw a lot of wine retailers, especially
especially high-end wine retailers. And I specifically remember the on Premier season where everything was down 15, 20, 25, 30%.
Right.
Even your Lafittes and your Aubrions and your Margot, like they were all coming way down. Whereas I look at this and I see February 2019, this hammers at 2970. June of 2020, when we were still right in the thick of a shutdown, this thing hammers at 3100. Right. And then 6 months later, it hammers at 3290. So you didn't see, I mean, to your point, you're not seeing any price compression on these wines that are a decade or more years old, right? Yeah. In fact, even under adverse economic conditions where you have a lot of producers panicking, even at the high end, these wines, you know, with 10 plus years on them still seem, from top producers, still seem to be going strong. Yeah.
No, and I think that an example that points out that fact is the next thing down on the list, which is the 09 Romani Saint Vivant from Romani Conti, hammered at 3890. That is definitely above the current external auction market's average. So that I think is you know, an example where it's from a killer vintage. You know, 09 was phenomenal Redberg vintage, and that's not going down anytime soon. So, you know, because if you look at the next hammer example on the list, it's the 11 Latache. And it's cheaper than 09 Saint Vivant, which, if you think about the vineyards and, you know, comparative value between them, if you want to go that route, well, you're getting a deal on the 11 Latache at that price, but you're getting the 11 vintage, which, again, you know, if you're looking into vintages for collectability or, God forbid, investment, you know, kind of insights, 11 Redberg was tricky. And so, you know, but again, I think if you're interested in drinking Latache and you buy the 11, you're not going to be disappointed. So I think it just points to, you know, the strength of the 09 vintage and the collectability of a you know, a very, very profound, great red vintage like 09, and it pushes the price of, let's just call it a lesser wine, a lesser vineyard in their sort of holdings comparatively. So yeah, you know, you see examples like this happen, you know, quite a bit.
Let's change gears here. I mean, we've talked about some of the really expensive stuff, and I think we'll come back to that. Let's talk about the stuff that sold last week that had a lot of interest in it, right? Sure. A couple of things come to mind. The 08, you know, Sean Thackeray Series Eagle Point Ranch Petite Syrah. We had a magnum of that. Two of them sold. They hammered at 55, which I thought was really interesting. And I know that's one that you're a little bit familiar with, that vineyard. Sure. Talk to me about that.
So yeah, the Sean Thackeray wines have always been, you know, I feel like they've always been ahead of the curve of the sort of natural winemaking process. You know, Sean Thackeray, unfortunately, sadly passed away not too long ago, earlier this year, I believe. And he has been, you know, a champion of biodynamics and making wines in the quote unquote natural way, however you'd like to define that. But he was actually very, very into it and studying medieval texts and employing very, very old winemaking techniques. And he's been doing this for years and years and years, right? Before anyone thought it was cool. And so those wines have always been really fascinating to me. He made a kind of a multi-vintage blend called the Pleiades that you could get around release time. I think was in the fall, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Someone will let us know. In any event, that was always a really fun wine because it was kind of limited, and you'd find it in Marin, and I'm bringing up Marin County because that's where I'm from, and I'm a fan. But also, Sean Thackeray lived in Bolinas, which is the, you know, kind of amazing surf community out in West Marin, where things have and have not changed dramatically in many years. And so anyway, he's been making, you know, really interesting blends of many, many different varieties together. And then also bringing in single vineyard varieties like Petit Syrah and Pinot Noir and Syrah and other things. And, fortunately, we've had a pretty neat collection of large formats, which you don't actually see very often. They're not that expensive. And so that's a really fun wine. That could be a Thanksgiving wine, frankly. I think there's quite a few more still on the site right now.
I may go grab some of those. Next on the list, we had 47 people tracking the '08 Val di Cava, right? Mm-hmm. Which this one I thought was really interesting. Okay, so we ended up selling two of those at $80 a bottle, right? Now look, I watch Val di Cava all the time, and it's not uncommon to see Val di Cava above over $100 a bottle. So to have one that is 14 years old, right, got some nice age on it, good quality bottle, $80 for an '08 Val di Cava, it just seems like, to me, that seems like a really good deal for a top end Brunello.
Yeah, no, you're right. I was actually going to bring this up a little earlier because I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but you were mentioning Rosso di Montalcino kind of, in comparison to the Lady Fesse as being, a good indicator of vintage, a younger drinking wine, something you can enjoy without breaking the bank. And there's Val di Cava, Rosso di Montalcino in the current auction, and it's $40 a bottle. So compared to Baby Sassicaia, that's not cheap. And so I would imagine that they're higher end and or flagship wines from the same vintage are probably over $100. And I don't even remember the vintage of the Rosso, but I can tell you in a second, and it's the '06. So anyway, I thought that was kind of funny because good stuff. But I mean, $40 for a Rosso di Montalcino plus commission that's not inexpensive.
I look at some of these where it's like an '08 Val di Cava, $80. To me, that's a steal, right? Some people think $80 for a bottle of wine is expensive. $80 for that bottle of wine, I don't think is that bad, right? We had, speaking of '08s, we had an '08 Krug, right? 44 people were tracking this, and sold for $605, right? '08, by the way, fantastic year for champagne.
Sure.
Just a marquee year on the champagne side. So a fantastic bottle. I don't even know when those Krugs came out, but it couldn't have been that long ago because we've seen 8 sales of the '08 Krug since April, right? So I think that one probably was more of a recent release. But here's the interesting thing to me. In April of 2022, that '08 Krug was hammering at $7.15 a bottle, right?
Right.
That one hammered at $5.55. We sold 3 of them, $5.55 a piece. So again, you're seeing something. I mean, look, this has more than 10 years of age, but it is a recent release.
Right.
Although we are talking about a marquee year for that region, going down in 6 months, going from $7.15 to $5.55. I mean, that's a pretty interesting drop in price. And by the way, it didn't just immediately drop $7.15, then it sold at $6.15, then it sold at $5.85, then it was back up to $6.15, down to $6.05, down to $5.55. I wonder if, what do you make of this in relation to champagne when you compare it to something like the DRCs that tend to be steadily going up?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think because it's a fairly recent release, there's still a fair amount of it available at retail. And so this is where you can look at retail examples, at least if the retailer's, well known and has the wine in stock. Some places are selling, on pre-arrival, they have teaser prices, or maybe they might have an inventory. I don't know. But, from retailers that have active inventory, that's something where, because of the fact that it's a fairly recent release, you can look and see where it's going. It's kind of curious and perplexing to me, actually, that it's dropped in price, since release, because you would imagine that it's become less available, especially at retail, since the release. And I think the price was actually substantially higher at retail as well. Again, I'm not really a retail price expert. I focus almost exclusively on auction, but we do buy wines for retail sale, and so there's a certain part of the market that I'm very familiar with. But this really high end champagne is a different story, and so I'm kind of confused as to where that's going. I think, again, ultimately it will increase in value because 08 is such an amazing vintage. I don't know if you've tasted some of them, but like Dom Perignon was just fantastic, and it was not terribly expensive a couple of years ago. And gosh, there's a whole host of smaller producers and all kinds of other things that are really, really good. So yeah, that's an interesting example for sure. And I think there's some up now, right? Like there's still actually some available at the same price at $5.55 or something.
That's a really good question.
They're $6.15. So it's a little higher. It's also in France, so a little different story there. But anyway,
let's talk about another one that I thought was really interesting. 09 La Rioja Alta Gran Reserva 904. I'm a big fan. We've discussed this. I'm a big fan of La Rioja Alta. I think they make just fantastic wine. $76 seems like pretty reasonable price to me.
Yeah.
For that La Rioja Alta, right?
Sure.
We've seen some price fluctuations with the La Rioja Alta, but right. I feel like that's one that is probably going to withstand the test of time in the long run. But what's really interesting, 19 that hammered at 70, right? By mid 2022, that bottle was going for between $90 and $95, right? And actually, I would say between 2021 and September, that was going for $90, $95. This last auction, we sold two of them at $75 and $76 a bottle, respectively. So again, you're seeing some good deals to be had at multiple sections of the market. 15 off of 90. That's a pretty decent discount, right?
That's true. 20%
off.
That's definitely true. And I think there are a lot of examples like that where it's a definitely a high end wine, from a very storied place and very well known and was going for more. But things are a little different with that these days. Now I of course like to talk about the absurd examples and the culty examples too, and so I can't not mention the Lamy Cayat wines that were in last week. Super micro production Burgundy family producer, or I should say partnership, and just pretty wild prices from Saint-Aubins, which traditionally have not gone for a tremendous amount of money. But if you look at what happened with the Lamy Cayats that were in last week, I think that there was a couple bottles of Saint-Aubins, and they hammered for $285. So that's not cheap. Now the Chassagne Montrachets were even more, which for a village wine or a appellation contrôlée, whatever you want to call it, the 18 hammered at $340. And that's, again, very expensive for a current or recent release. Chassagne Montrachet AC. The La Romanée went for $665 for the 19, and I think the 18 might have gone for even a little bit more. $655 for the 18. So, those were kind of like standout examples that got a lot of bids. I think all of them, but the Saint-Aubin got at least 5 bids. So people were really, people were going after these early on in the week. Another that we like to talk about a lot is Ulysse Collins. Well, it's one of my favorite, small grower champagnes, if you will. And the prices, unfortunately, have just gone through the roof. And so, last week or 2 weeks ago, I think there was one for over 700. that was a recent disgorgement. It wasn't, I think it was disgorged in 2019. A couple more examples last week, and they went for over 350 a piece. So it's just like a lot of serious coin for that stuff. But great wines. The other champagne that I should mention that's getting, I would say, a lot of press and attention, but still not crazy expensive, is the Musset. There were a couple bottles of Musset Rosé that I actually bid on and won, but they did start at 30 and they ended up selling for, close to $50 a bottle. So not terrible, but I think those are kind of headed that direction. I don't know if they're going to hit, $700 anytime soon, but still great wines, great producer. And a lot of buzz about them right now.
Well, hold on. Go out and try and find a bottle of rosé champagne from a reputable producer for under $50. Like it is not easy to do, right?
True,
so
true.
Even at $48, that is still a very reasonably priced bottle of rosé champagne as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean,
you're always paying a premium for that. But I'm a huge fan of rosé champagne. I have not had the Musset. I've not had Ulysses Cologne. Those prices don't seem ridiculous to me, if I'm being honest.
No. Not yet. And I think that's the thing. It's always fun to watch these examples and catch them early on, as it were, in their in their trajectory.
Right. And by the way, now you've just sold an additional bottle or two of Musset.
Well, that's the thing. If you can find it, I don't think there's any up this week. So it's one of those things that's not always available. So
I'm gonna call the warehouse and have them transfer yours to me. Because I do enjoy a nice bottle of rosé sparkling, and it is about to be the season. Let's talk a little bit about. So actually, there's one thing I wanted to mention that I wanted to kind of like throw at you, because this sort of gets back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, but we were talking about things that had a lot of trackers and sold. One of the ones that's near and dear to my heart, I love Crozes Hermitage, right? Which, by the way, I don't think I mentioned. I'm drinking a bottle of.
Oh yeah, I feel that. I forgot to ask you what you were drinking. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's Domaine de Grand Chemin. Delas.
Delas, yeah. Delas is
I love Northern Rhone wines. I know Paul makes fun of me for some of my wine choices, but I am unabashedly interested in Crozes Hermitage. You make fun of me all you want for this and my Cru Beaujolais.
Hey, I just think you should be drinking Saint Joseph, but you're drinking Crozes Hermitage. That's okay. That's no problem.
I understand.
I'm totally joking.
Look, I am not a sophisticated man. Okay. I drink Cru Beaujolais. I drink Crozes Hermitage.
Cru Beaujolais. You're okay. You're dropping that term in right there. You're just saying, no, hold on. I drink Cru Beaujolais. So I just want everyone to know. I drink Cru Beaujolais. All right, it's okay.
You're giving me a hard time.
If it's 10 or 20 years old, now you're actually cool, right?
Paul was giving me the hardest time. I mean, I love Cru Beaujolais. I was like, everyone loves Cru Beaujolais, Jeff. Come on, move on. We've been there. We've done that.
I think it's just you have to sort of throw that out as kind of street cred, right? You have to throw out that you love aged Cru Beaujolais, because that means you're actually seriously into wine.
I have to throw that out to get street cred while I'm wearing a fedora. Right.
Well, no, then you lost me. Then I don't listen to anything you have to say at all.
Then then you just complain. But there was which I love this producer. 2015, Paul Jaboulet, Adne Crozes Hermitage, Domaine de Talabert. It started at 50. We sold 9 for $502, so it's $56 a bottle. I think that's a fantastic deal for 7-year-old bottle, almost 8-year-old bottle of Crozes Hermitage from what I consider to be a great producer. I don't follow the vintage charts for Crozes necessarily. I'm not even sure they exist, but to me that actually seemed like a phenomenal deal. 56 does not seem crazy at all for that bottle.
No, I think 15 was such a great vintage for so many different parts of the wine world, but yeah, definitely in the Rhone, and that's Chablis is sort of a big name, as it were, but that's great stuff. I haven't had the Talabert in a long time, so that sounds great. I mean, there's I think even younger versions available now too for a little less. Well, there's not the Talabert, but there's the Domaine Raymond Roure, which I don't even know about, and that's $40 for the 18. So yeah, there's a lot of value still. I mean, there's a lot of things that have obviously gone, bonkers, and like I was giving you flack earlier about not drinking Saint Joseph. Those wines are kind of turning into, more cult collectibles, obviously, depending on the producer. There's some going on in right now, which has kind of been an auction darling for quite a few years. And the prices are, they're tough to swallow, especially, for places like Saint Joseph, where they're $180 versus, like a Delos, like same producer, what you're drinking. In Crozes Hermitage, their Saint Joseph 2011 is $40. So you can see the kind of difference there. Alain Graillot is another one that unfortunately passed away, but the wines have always been very well respected. And they're not really, I don't think that they're getting carried away as far as price. The Like You Wrote is kind of the big deal, label that people like to go after, but the sort of standard label appellation Saint Joseph is really, really good. And there's, 3 bottles of the 17 in right now for 65. And I don't think that's not a crazy price. So, I think it's compared to say like Hermitage or Côte Rôtie, it's not nearly that crazy. So there's still good value to be found in and same thing with Châteauneuf-du-Pape if we're going to switch to the Southern Rhone. Yes. Again, sort of a controversial region just because there's so many different styles. There are a lot of things that kind of turn into overripe examples and, over extracted examples in the late 90s and early 2000s. But I think now there's still a lot of really cool wines coming from there. And again, you can pay crazy money for Reyes and, Hommage à Perrin and whatever, but there's still a lot of other things that are not crazily expensive. So yeah, the Rhone's great. I mean, the Rhone has everything, right? It's like, we were talking about Chateau Gruyère. That was the other thing I wanted to bring up. Yeah. Is that, Condrieu, or excuse me, not Condrieu. It's its own appellation. I keep forgetting. Chateau Gruyère, it's a monopole. It's also its own appellation. It's its own single property. There was a bottle of the 97 in last week that I was tracking, but there was a lot of activity on it. So I got a little scared and I think it hammered at 205, but really, really cool, really collectible, really, if you want to say the word unique, I think it's overused in every world, but especially the wine world. However, that particular wine is unique just in the sense of its his history and the fact that it's monopole and appellation, its own property, everything else, and that just all of a sudden a bottle of 97 popped in and got a lot of bids. But it's collectible, it's rare, and it's also going to show its kind of colors and beauty if you brought it to a tasting full of like wine snobs, right? It's like there are those kinds of examples where it's like, oh, cool, like, oh yeah, I know about this. Like, we're not drinking Burgundy, we're not drinking champagne, but hey, this is rare stuff. This is cool stuff. So anyway, speaking of Rhone, it's just like everything can be found in the Rhone.
Let's talk about Châteauneuf-du-Pape for just a second. Then I want to take a hop, skip, and a jump over to a different part of France. One of the things that I've noticed is Châteauneuf-du-Pape especially amongst some of the top producers. I mean, as long as you're staying with their standard line, seem to be very affordable to me, right? I'm looking at, right now I'm looking at a Boucassel, who's considered to be one of the top Chateauneuf de Pape producers. Their standard, Chateau Boucassel, not the homage, but just the standard one, which is fantastic. I mean, you're looking at an 04, $100, 05, 105, 05, 105.
Right.
To me, those seem like incredibly reasonable prices for phenomenal wines, which are right in their drinking window. They're probably aged perfectly at this point. Right. And by the way, looking at like an 08, $66 for a 750 Boucassel. I mean, that's to me, that's a fantastic price. Now, granted, 08 may be a bit of an off year, but I can't imagine that and I haven't tried the 08 because I can't imagine it's that bad. Right. Right. Like I'm sure it's still pretty amazing. I don't know if I've ever had a bad bottle of Boucassel. Right. But you're seeing I still think there's a lot of tremendous value in the Southern Rhone, particularly with Chateauneuf de Pape, despite the fact that they're very well known.
No, for sure. I agree, because there's a lot of producers, right? So I think a lot of names kind of get lost in the mix, and there's also a tremendous amount of them are critiqued and reviewed. So if you are interested in scores and reviews, I think you have a lot of help in that sense, right? Yeah. You can pretty much look up. There's many producers, and so I think you're always going to be able to find something, that's either mature or from an anniversary vintage of some kind, or maybe just a vintage of note, right? That you've wanted to try. And so there's always something of value to be found, I think, in the Rhone in general, right? I mean, now, of course, there are outliers. I did notice you mentioned 08, and there's 08 Reyes in the current auction. I think it's 1325. So, you can always go that route. Those wines have become just insanely collectible. And I actually was going to mention that last week there was a bottle of the 14 La Pielade that hammered at 215, which, is just crazy. that wine, it's, again, I hate to be one of those people that talks about how cheap things were, back in the day, but it's kind of an extreme example, because you could honestly purchase the Pielade and the Pignon and sort of the other, basically every label, even the flagship, even the Reyes Chateauneuf, you could very readily, easily buy it at many, sort of bigger retailers in big cities, and especially the Côte du Rhône, the Pielade. And it was not expensive. It was like definitely in the $30 to $40 range, and you could buy it by the case, right? Like you could buy it at cost plus, for God's sakes. And it's just unbelievable how valuable those wines have become. So
it is just take it off. The other one that I wanted to mention that I keep a close eye on, because I really love Clos de Pape. Their Chateauneuf de Pape is one that I've just always been a huge fan of. I think it ages fantastically. I think it's to me, it's all. But what I love about it most is I feel like it's a really good deal, right? We've got like 17s, 19s going for $85 a bottle, which for a top tier, CDP producer, I think that's a great price, right?
Right.
Now, granted, I was buying it at retail, to do what Paul just criticized, and I just criticized Paul for doing. I was buying it at retail like 3, 4, 5 years ago for like $60. So it's definitely come up in price a bit, but everything's come up in price a bit because of inflation and a bunch of other stuff. However, you're still able to get, some really good deals, in my opinion, on Chateauneuf de Pape. Let's take a hop, skip, and jump over to Bordeaux, right? Which is, I think, everybody in the wine world's favorite region to criticize for not having a lot of value, which is not to say Bordeaux wines aren't. I have a lot of Bordeaux. I love Bordeaux. Bordeaux is fantastic. They make phenomenal wine. But I think most people, and Paul, I think you would agree, there's not a ton of value in Bordeaux when you compare it to some other areas. Mm-hmm. However, looking at this last auction, I thought it was really interesting. We had a 2016 Bernard de Cru, which hammered at $60. We sold 6 of those, right? We had, and this is the one that was really interesting. We had a Chateau Canon, a 14 Chateau Canon, $67, right? Which for a kid, I mean, look, I love Canon. I think they make phenomenal wine. $67 for an 8-year-old bottle of Canon, I think is a fantastic deal.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's true. There's definitely, definitely a lot of examples, especially last week, actually, for wines from, not just great vintages and but all kinds of things. So yeah, it definitely could have, definitely found value in, things that were 10, 15, 20 years old, under $100, for something with some age on it. That's, you can't argue with that at all.
2000 Pichon Baron, 210.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, look, second growth Bordeaux with 22 years of age on it.
Sure.
It's in its prime right now.
Sure.
$210 is you would pay that for a bottle of Pichon Baron or close to that today. If you got one on, even on Premier, right?
Right.
And then the other really interesting one, we had an 85 Lynch Bage, right, which hammered at 215, right? Which I thought was really interesting to see the Lynch Bage, because so that one back in 2021. I mean, how many we've sold? Like we've done 707 sales of an 85 Lynch Bage. Yeah.
Right. Something that's obviously, it's been sort of a staple. I mean, Lynch Bage is kind of a staple, in the auction world for years and years and years. And it's that place in particular is really fascinating to me, because the 89 has always been their sort of most heralded, vintage, and it's phenomenally good wine, but it's also kind of priced sort of out of the
priced that way.
Priced that way too, compared to almost every other vintage. I shouldn't say every, because I'm sure 82 isn't cheap, and some other examples, obviously older examples as well. But it's still like doesn't seem kind of out of control, right? And that's the thing I think that gets back to like, just sort of what we were talking about before in the Rhone, is that like, there are these wines, these wines that have just taken off in value and they're unattainable or whatever, but there's always something else, that kind of takes its place. And like we were talking about champagnes before too. It's like, so like you look, these wines they're $40 or $50, and maybe they won't be next year or even next month. But same thing is true, I think, with Bordeaux. There and even those wines that have a lot of time on. Like I noticed, like 03 has always been a really interesting vintage for me in Bordeaux and France in general, because it was so hot. It was like. It was a terrible, I think, summer because of, the fact that places that needed to have temperature control were not, and it was very problematic. But the wines, have turned out quite interesting. But the auction, the secondary market, the auction kind of reflects, I think, people's trepidation with the vintage. Now, there are certain things I would stay away from, like White Bergs from 03. It's like, yikes. But, 03 red Bordeaux, they're like Grand Prix Lacoste, right? That's now kind of, again, is pushing, over 3 figures for a lot of things. But the 03, it hammered at $70, like, and it's almost 20 years old, right? It's like, that's
a great deal.
Really, it's great. And I don't think, with 20 years of age on it, I don't think it's going to be a fruit bomb. Now, I haven't read, current notes as far as, how it's doing. If it's like totally just pruned out at this point, I doubt it. But there are a lot of kind of examples like that where, okay, yeah, it's it's maybe from a controversial vintage, but not a bad vintage, not a kind of rainy, lean, crappy vintage. So that's like one of those things where you can still find value. And since that's, sort of our theme, I think it makes a lot of sense to look at those examples.
I feel like anytime I can find something, especially with some age on it from a top tier Bordeaux producer for under $100, I always feel like that's a really good value, right? But I feel like over the last maybe 5 years, a lot of that has faded away, and so even your Lynch Bage, your Ponte Canet, they're still coming to market above $100, whereas you used to be able to get them sub $100 5 to 10 years ago. So when I see stuff, like the Canon and some of the other ones we were talking about, where they're sub $100 and they've got a few years on them, I look at that as a tremendous value, because I guess my feeling is the reason those have gone up in price, and I could be wrong here, isn't because the last 5 years, every year has just been, even better, and the wine's, twice as good as it was 5 years ago. I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of it is just marketing and price pressures and demand in the market and supply and stuff like that.
Sure.
But for some reason, if you can find a 14 for $70, my gosh, that to me, I'd be all over that all day long. I want to switch gears here just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about things that sold last week at auction that had a lot of bids on them, where we talked about wines that had a lot of people watching them.
Right.
Let's talk about wines that had actually a lot of activity.
Sure.
Number one was that 07 Domaine l'Abbé Chardonnay Les Varens. I'm probably butchering that name.
Yes, you are. You absolutely are.
I know you're going to correct me, because Paul loves anything. Paul lives for correcting my mispronunciation. I'll have you know that on things where I'm actually educated on, like, I can pronounce very well. It's just not this or most things.
I'm just kidding. I like to give people a hard time in any field, any subject,
any subject whatsoever.
Yeah,
but you're looking at started at $30. Hammers at we sold two for 240, so hammered at around 120, $130 a bottle.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the 2010, which got 9 bids, hammered for 145. It started at 30, so that's even more. So that wine is really interesting in the sense that, I don't know it, so I can't speak about the wine itself, but it doesn't have, secondary market history, shall we say. I'm sure it's, sold in the secondary market somewhere. We've obviously sold this wine, many vintages of this wine over the years. Well, I should say a few vintages, not many vintages, but several vintages. And, it's one of those things where it's like, it's really, really hard to predict, right? Because the 07, for example, sold, let's see, I mean, the last time it sold was in 2014 for $26, right? And so it's like, what's going on with that? That's just wild. And then, similarly, the 2010 last sold in, sorry, I don't have the data in front of me, but it didn't, we don't have any record of that ever selling. So
never sold with us before.
Yeah. So these are always really interesting. And maybe it's because, there's a really, passionate sort of audience for, Jura Chardonnay and for particular producers. And I know there is for various wines, obviously, but yeah, I mean, somebody's really going after this wine.
There's a passionate audience of at least 2.
Exactly.
Going after this wine, which this is, I always talk about this. We've talked this before. I call it the line theory, where like, if there's a line and there's like very few people in it, then there's nothing worthwhile on the other end, right? Regardless of whether or not you know what the line is for. On the other hand, if there's a line and there's a ton of people in it, right? Even if you don't know what's on the other end of the line, I always get in that line, no matter what. Because like if all these people are standing in line, there's got to be something good there. I guess that's my way of saying I'm going to be watching. I'm going to be watching for this wine, because while I've never really said to myself, and you're probably very different because Paul is much more affluent and sophisticated than I am, but far more
entirely untrue.
But I've never said to myself like, oh, I really want some, Chardonnay from Jura, right? Like don't get me wrong, I've got some Vinjon, and I think there's some interesting stuff going on in Jura. It's not a region I'm super educated on,
right.
But now I really want some Chardonnay from Jura, because, or at least from this vineyard, because if there are 9 bids and 10 bids respectively, and we had 21 trackers on one, 18 trackers on the other, there are some people who are very passionate about it. That must be much better than I could possibly conceive.
Yeah, I mean, it's always cool actually to find things like this, because I'm more interested in that in the sense that there isn't auction history on this wine, right? And like maybe I'm just not aware of its sort of cult collectability status. But I don't get that sense just looking at, sort of poking around the internet and seeing, what people are saying about it. It's not something that you readily obtain knowledge about as far as its value or collectability, in the wine world. So it's always cool. And I think we'll always, see these kinds of examples, and we might not see it again for 8 years or however.
I know, right? So the next time it comes up in 2030, I will definitely get that bottle.
It might cost you $1,000, but
right. At this rate, I mean, it went up 5x, so it'll probably like $700 is what I'll pay for it in 2030 when it comes again. We had 9 bids and 42 trackers on an 08 Jerome Blend Brut Les Caillasses. Again, I'm sure I'm butchering that. Not a producer I'm filling.
Caillas, yeah, Caillas. But yeah, it's this. I can't speak for this wine because unfortunately I'm not knowledgeable in it. But obviously, it's a collectible. Has to be, I would imagine, a single vineyard, wine. It's got a picture of a horse on the label, and presumably the vigneron, behind it.
That looks like Rajat Par. I mean, if I didn't know any better,
maybe it is.
I mean, maybe it is.
I don't think so, but maybe he's working for Jerome Blanc. I have no idea.
Raj was 4 of those 9 bids, probably. Maybe. This is another one. Started at 40, ended at 75. $75 for a great bottle of vintage champagne, 08, which is a good vintage. That seems very reasonable to me. This is another one that I'm definitely be keeping an eye on. With 9 bids, and this is the only time we've sold this. Probably a recent release.
It was disgorged in 2017, I believe. And so I have no idea about this producer, but I would imagine, it was probably a recent release if they held on to it for a couple of years, or, whoever's bringing it in to the US has recently gotten the allocation or whatever it may be. But that and again, that is something where you may not see it again for quite a long time.
Right.
And I looked at this one as well, other vintages of Les Caillas, and didn't see any secondary market activity externally. And so it's like, okay, might be one to watch. Again, might just be, a really interested audience and just really collectible in the
Mm-hmm.
sort of more obscure, but high quality, champagne producer, just like that Girard wine. So again, I think cool to see these kinds of things come through, but who knows when we'll see it again.
What about, so right next to that, we had an 08 Rougeot Caillas Extra Brut Blanc de Bancs. It's not just Brut. This one is extra. They added a little bit more Brut than they would normally add. It's extra Brut. But that one started at 25, hammered at 42. Again, 08, fantastic year, right? $42, right? You're paying less than you're going to pay for a bottle of Vouv yellow label at Costco at this point.
Right.
To me, that seems like a fantastic deal for '08 champagne.
Right.
And then 15 Arnaud Roberts Clary Ranch Syrah started at 45. 8Bids got it to $70.
Yeah, this wine, I would suspect like the reason for this is the score, and I hate to say that just on principle, but I think that could be or not obviously, but I believe it to be a smaller production wine from this already small production facility, and it got a really high Venus score, 97 points, and it hasn't been an auction that many times, only a handful of times. And so I think my suspicion would be that it's the super high score and the low production that pushed that price up. But that's just me.
Let's talk for a second about this one. Surprised me. 19 trackers, 8Bids on a 2017 Schramsberg Blanc de Blancs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, don't get me wrong. I love Schramsberg Blanc de Blancs. I think it's a fantastic sparkling. I was just surprised that we saw so much activity on something that had a fairly recent release, right? I mean, that's not crazy old for us.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not a crazy price, obviously, but still, they're paying the Hammer plus commission. And so it's, it is interesting in the sense that it seems like that wine is fairly readily available. However, we live in California, we're spoiled. We see a lot of stuff, that's from our backyard, as it were, in retail in general, whereas, others may not have that option. So I think it's this winery is like hands down, I mean, one of the best producers of sparkling wine in domestically or pretty much anywhere, in the New World. And the wines are, very consistent, very, very, very good. And so I think there's just a lot of interest in something like this. And, people are starting to buy sparkling wines and other things for holidays coming up, if they're planning. And so it's something that's going to get a lot of attention, even if the price isn't mind boggling. It's always cool to see. And I'm biased because I just support this winery. I think their stuff is great. So there you go. Let me just say, like a little side note, they make a late disgorged wine for the premier Napa Valley auction every year, and it's so good, and everybody goes nuts for it, especially on Saturday morning before the auction. That's like, what you're drinking at 8:30 in the morning. So it's it's good stuff.
Well, get me a bottle, damn it. I would love all that. By the way, the one more thing, and then I want to move on to, before we wrap up, I want to talk about what we're watching and our picks. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, we had 20 trackers, 7 bids on the 2018 Keller Feuervogel Sylvaner Trocken, right? Which Feuervogel is, of course, as you know, Paul, it's German for Firebird. I was going to say that. You just took it. I took the word. Right. I saw you starting to form words, and I cut you off. I apologize. But that one started at 40, Hammers at 70. But 7Bids, that one's kind of another interesting one. This is a producer I'm not as familiar with, but I believe you are familiar with this producer.
You should be, because if you claim to like German wines,
I love German wines.
You should know who Keller is. No, I'm being silly again, which is what I do most of the time. And that's why I love wine so much. Is you can be silly about it, and people can get real riled up. So that's the whole point. And so I think, but in a similar kind of vein, people get riled up about Keller, right? I have to say, I feel like, and there's a lot of examples of this in the wine world and elsewhere, I'm sure, that there is an incredible amount of, sort of underground marketing that takes place for a brand like this. And if you go to Instagram, there are, several individuals who sort of unabashedly promote this wine to the degree that it becomes popular. And honestly, I almost think that they can have an effect on the market. But, that might not be the case here. I might be just kind of full of nonsense. However, it has a cult following. Keller is just, the wines are phenomenal. That's goes without saying. The Rieslings, the Grosses Gewachs wines, they've got huge scores. The GMAX is unbelievably sought after, incredibly expensive in the auction. A lot of it, I think, goes to the secondary market. A lot of it's brought into the U.S. in the gray market. So this wine, the Sylvaner, they're better known for Riesling, but Sylvaner, I'm sure it's phenomenal. I've never tasted it. I don't have very much Keller, unfortunately, because I think it has this, it has this cult status. So I would, it'd be fun to try it, right? We should buy some of these wines.
I would love to try some Keller. By the way, really quickly, can I just read you? I read this tasting note for this bottle, and the first paragraph of the first line of the tasting note, I find to be amazing. It says, "Can the winemaker transcend the inherent limitations of the grape, or will the grape, like gravity, draw them back down?"
Wow, that's heady stuff.
Bravo. Well, I'll tell you what, this has transcended my interest for Keller wines, period. Right. I mean, look, at the end of the day, $69.
Well, the gravity of the price will bring you back down to earth.
The gravity of the price will bring me back down. I don't know, $69 is not, to me, is not crazy for a really interesting white wine. I mean, look at what people.
No. I mean, yeah, and especially if you look at some of the super sought after wines from Keller in general, they're four figures, right? So yeah, this is not an obscenely expensive example, and the same holds true for all kinds of other things in Germany, right? There's so many deals for 10, 20, 30-year-old Riesling that's incredibly complex and incredibly fun to drink and ever changing as it oxidizes more over drinking it. So yeah, no, it's not nuts. It's not crazy.
So I don't think it's crazy at all. And I mean, I pay $69 for a Keller wine all day long. Now let's pivot a little bit before we wrap things up.
Okay.
Look, holiday season is coming up, right? And I know you're probably looking for gifts for friends and especially podcast co-hosts. So I just wanted to throw some things out there, which I think could be interesting options. Look, if you were to buy me something, if I were to receive a bottle of 85 Sassicaia for the holidays, for Christmas, or honestly, for whatever occasion you'd like to buy one for me, I wouldn't be upset.
Okay. Well, would you be upset if I bought the 2018 Prisoner de Reign? we currently have, a bottle available for, not a terrible price. So I know you're a fan of this wine, so I could definitely look into,
here's the thing.
85 Sassicaia. I mean, I think that might just be over the hill by now. I think it's
here's the thing.
I mean, it's only 4 years younger than you, for God's sakes.
I already have a bottle of that Prisoner. Awkward. So, okay. And I know you hate giving someone something that they've already got.
True. Yeah, you've got large formats too. So okay.
That's right. Yeah. 85 Sassicaia. I haven't tried that yet. Right.
Well, where have you been? I mean,
where have I been? What have I raised in a barn?
Yeah. When did you start drinking wine? Last year?
Do I brush my teeth manually like a pilgrim? But we've got one at oh my God, you're not going to believe this, Paul. We actually have an 85 Sassicaia at auction right now. $2,200. Yeah. Now we were talking about Sassicaia at much more reasonable prices before.
Yes.
$200 for an 85 seems a bit steep for a 750 milliliter.
That is correct. And as you saw last week, you were outbid on a Magnum. So La Defese, excuse me.
It wasn't 85. It was not an 85 though.
No, it wasn't 85. However, you might have maybe pushed your auto bid a little bit more and you might have been able to secure that. So
I should have.
But hey, why don't we find something in the middle? I'll find you something somewhere in the middle.
How about this? Interesting value stuff that I'm keeping an eye on this week.
Sure.
78 Chateau Montelena Estate, which Montelena Estate is they're at their top end. 78, good bottle. Forget scores. The tasting notes I'm drinking are saying that it's still doing great. I think 305 for a 78 Montelena Estate is very reasonable.
Yeah, so it's funny. It kind of touches a nerve because. Oh,
you disagree?
Well, no, not that. It's that my birth year, which I won't say publicly, but it was from another very, very, I would say very, very good to outstanding vintage from the 70s. And the prices have become unobtainable, right? So not the prices, but the wines become unobtainable because of the fact that they're just so high. And so 78 is next in line. And I feel like, you're only going to see things go up and up and up and up, especially now as we creep towards, the 50 year, right? The 50 year mark. So by 2018, or excuse me, what am I saying? I can't do math. 2028, the 78s will probably be in the same realm as 74. And I think the wines are probably aging better than 74 as well. And I just outed myself. But anyway. I was going
to say, I think we might know what year Paul was born now.
But it's the if I'm trying to get to a point, which I actually am, it is that 1978, let's just say California, Sonoma, Napa region, those wines, and maybe, Santa Cruz Mountains, Montebello, don't forget Montebello. It's always amazing, but they will become, I think, in the same range as the 74s have now. Now, maybe not to that degree, but still, this is, you're exactly right. The 78 Montelena at 305 is not atrocious, and this bottle looks great. And so, yeah, that's cool. It's funny. It's cool that you mentioned 78 California, because I've always looked at those wines because there's so many great examples, and some of them still fly under the radar, and I'm not going to mention those for fear that they'll be.
No, not flying for fear anybody will listen to our podcast.
Right. And there's actually one in the auction right now that has a bid, and it's a couple $100 less than the 78 Montelena. So it's going to be gone, by this Sunday, but still, like, phenomenally good wines. There's 78 Mondavi Reserve, which I don't know if you've had the Reserve. I think it's much better than the non-reserve Mondavi cab. I'm a huge fan of older reserve Mondavi cabs, just like every other wine fanatic. But still, the source for that fruit for the reserve wines is it's Tocolon and Oakville. It's very famous. It's there's a lot of things going on there, and I must mention my friends Graham and Alex McDonald, who are making the sort of modern day version, I think, of the the best possible wine from Oakville, which is their family's name, McDonald Cabernet Sauvignon, and the parcel of vines actually in Tocolon from McDonald's vineyard source, from their family's vineyard, used to go into the reserve Cabernets from Robert Mondavi, and the ones from 70s, even 60s, actually 70s, 80s, and 90s are incredible wines. So 78 Mondavi Reserve, I would also definitely throw in that same category. It's $240. There's a couple bottles. There's a 2 bottles. And this bottle looks great. Like, the fills into the neck, clean label, if that makes a difference to you, but just amazing wine, like really, 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 really impressive. And it was good, 30, 40 years ago, and it's amazing now. So
good now.
Yeah.
Let's by the way, I do have a bottle of 70 Mondavi.
78 reserve or 78 non-reserve?
Oh, we 78 or I've got a bottle of 70.
70. Okay.
I've got a bottle of 70, a bottle of 69.
69 is phenomenal because that's actually before they had a reserve label, and the 69 Cabernet is just phenomenal. That's one of the best California wines I've ever had. I had 69 in Magnum. It's just like unreal. It's phenomenal wine.
Do you want to drink this one with me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Same city.
Bring it up here.
I will. I'm saving it for you. I also have 2 bottles of 66 Charles Krug. I've got a bottle of. I have 5 bottles of 70 Mondavi Pinot Noir. I've had one. It was actually very good.
I have an idea.
Yeah.
We should find a way to taste the 69 Mondavi next to the 69 Chapelet. That's what we should do.
Yes. Speaking of Chapelet, so that was I love to watch Chapelets. This is a producer, and unlike you, I'm willing to disseminate all my secrets because I'm supremely confident nobody will be interested in this podcast and want to listen to it. Chapelet, look, there are a lot of phenomenal Napa producers. Right. Napa, like Bordeaux, like Burgundy, I don't think there's a lot of value in it because a lot of the producers, they're priced very highly, as they deserve to be. They produce phenomenal wine. For me, I love Chapelet. I love just about everything I've ever tasted from Chapelet, all the way from their Mountain Cuvée to the signature, which I can't remember the gentleman's name, but it was like, he wrote the book, 100 Wines You Should Taste Before You Die. The Chapelet signature's there. It's always great, all the way to Pritchard Hill. And I've even done tastings there. Their Cabernet Franc is I mean, everything that I've tasted from them, I've just really, really enjoyed. And well, I'm not going to sit here and say it's cheap wine. I think when you compare it to Napa, there's tremendous value, right? When you look at their top tier Pritchard Hill, which in my mind will compete with any other top tier Napa producer. A few years ago, if you're on their allocation list, you're getting it for $215 a bottle-ish. Right now, I think it's higher. It's $260, $270-ish a bottle. I can't remember. But to me, that's not a bad deal. And then I'm looking at auction, and you can go and find Chapelet Pritchard Hill, which again, this is their top tier wine, 2011, $135 a bottle, when you can't get the most recent releases for less than $200 a bottle, if not $200.
Right. No, that's true. I mean, it's like we've discussed this before, but it's surrounded by very, very, very expensive Cabernet based wines, Continuum, Colgan, David Arthur. Although David Arthur, I would say is not nearly as bad as say wines from Colgan. When I say bad, I mean just very expensive. No offense to LVMH or anybody over there. I don't want to piss anyone off, but and actually as a parallel,
why should they get upset for being able to charge a premium for their wine? Like, how dare you?
What I was going to say was kind of tying into what I was talking about before about Mondavi Reserve, is that Tim Mondavi was responsible for some of these amazing wines from the Oakville property from To Kalon years ago, and then went on to create Continuum up on the hill. And the wines are phenomenal. I mean, they're incredible. However, Chapelet has proven to be something, I think, that you can get that kind of complexity and mountain character for better value. Yeah. And so I have to agree with you. And the 11 was like dogged in red Burgundy, dogged in Napa, but some amazing mountain wines particularly. So that's a great example.
And even if you don't want to pay more than 100, right, for like the Pritchard Hill, which I think Pritchard Hill is fantastic. 98 signature Cabernet Sauvignon, $65 right now, right?
Right, and that's another example too, where the 98 vintage was like famously difficult in Napa and Sonoma as well, and I think you've just got to taste the wine, right? Like don't go based on what the scores say and what everybody says, but go out and drink it, try it and see what you think. And if you enjoy it and you love it, you can't argue with that. That's a great deal.
I mean, look, if you look at the tasting notes, the tasting notes for the 98 are still pretty good, right? So it's still, and by the way, if you're going to go buy a bottle of Signature today, you're still looking at paying $80 a bottle. So, by the way, the 2003, $70, right now. So again, I still think there's tremendous value to be had, even with Napa wines, especially if you're willing to look. I mean, probably be looking across all producers, but particularly with some of these producers, I think, to me, that's particularly interesting. The other one I saw, which is really interesting, I'm following 59 Inglenook Cask J6 Cabernet Sauvignon, $705. I love Inglenook. I've had some of their old Inglenooks before it started changing hands, and it had some of the original winemakers. They're phenomenal wines that are still speaking today. They
last a long, long time, and they've got a proven track record, obviously, and it's amazing that they're still available and out there. And it's for something from 1959 that's not crazily expensive, and so that's a really, really cool example and a great vintage. And you're not, I mean, it's going to be tough to find other 59 examples from Napa and specifically Rutherford. So
100%. And the other one that I'm keeping an eye on, 2013 Stag's Leap, Cask 23. I like, don't hate me. I think Stag's Leap makes some solid wine.
No, I'm not going to give you shit just because it's a big name.
It's a big name. But what I thought was really interesting, you're looking at Cask 23 coming out at above $250 a bottle, right? If you're to go out and buy recent releases. We've got a 2013, which, by the way, 2013, phenomenal year in Napa. Great wines came out of Napa in 2013. You may disagree, but I think you're wrong if you do disagree with me, because I think the stuff I've had from 13 is always just
No, I totally agree. 13 is like a massive vintage. I think it kind of, for some reason, reminds me of like the way in which, there were a lot of wines from late 90s, early 2000s in Napa that a lot of people criticized for being over extracted, and the tannin levels weren't particularly, significant. And so some of the wines have, fallen apart in some people's minds. And I can't agree with everything because I haven't tasted, through the lineup, as it were, a lot of those wines, but it is true to a degree. There are some, that kind of winemaking style of over extraction and maybe seeking points or whatever, in late 90s, early 2000s was very prevalent. And then things started to shift. And then, you had 2010, and 11 was tricky, and 12 was big, but then 13 was like, wow. Yeah. I mean, I remember going to Oakville tasting actually, and when they were all pouring the 13s, and they were just like gnarly tannins. I mean, just searing your mouth. And so I was like, oh wow. Like it was like a stylistic shift. You know what I mean? It's you're like, hand me some used tea bags to suck on so I can get a break from this. Yeah, it was right. I mean, the wines are really, really, really good, but I have to agree with you there. It's a kick-ass vintage, no doubt. It'll last a long time, right? That's like, again, it's like one of those things where you kind of feel, you could say safely, that'll last 30, 40 years, no problem. I mean, even back to Inglenook, the 13 estate Inglenook Cabernet, which was, let's just say it's very readily available, right? That wine will last. That thing is going to last a long ass time. And it's cool to see, how those wines are. I mean, it's almost 10 years old now, but it still feels like a very young vintage. Well, but to add on to that, so 2013 Stag's Leap, Cask 23, $185 starting price. Mm-hmm. To me, we don't know what that's going to gavel at. Right. But like,
unless that goes up to 250 or even higher, I think anything below 200, anything below 240 is a very reasonable price in my mind for 2013 top tier Napa cab.
Yeah, no, I agree with you for sure. And it's, I think it does get a little bit kind of lost in the, in the weeds, as it were, with so many other, kind of classic Napa Valley producers. And so it's one of the, I mean, shit, the old school Stag's Leap wine cellars from back in the day were legendary. I mean, 73 won the Judgment of Paris, for God's sakes, they're incredible wines. And so now it to me, it's kind of one of those brands that kind of gets lost in the shuffle, as it were. So I don't know. It's interesting for sure, but that's a great idea. I was going to mention there are a lot of really cool large formats from Napa in the current auction, and large formats. I've always gravitated towards them because you're not going to open them every day. They're a special occasion. They're great for, family gatherings or big parties or whatever.
They'll age longer.
Yeah. And they age long. Exactly. They age, a long time. And so I'm just kind of scrolling through here as we're talking, but there was I believe in 06, Stag's Leap Cast 23 mag.
How much?
For hold on, sorry. Oh, there's J Schramm mags. That's pretty cool. Yeah, Lake Disgorged 01. There you go. Get that thing. 01 Schramsberg Lake Disgorged mag 155. I mean, that's going to be awesome. It's got a wood box. You can bring it into a party. Everybody goes crazy. There you go. No, Cast 23 05. 06 mag 280. So that's got a good amount of age on it. It's under $300 per mag. I mean, that's great. I'm sure they're charging like $400 at least for their, Cast 23 mags at the winery, maybe more.
Wait, what was the one that I need to bid on? Sorry, what was the one you were saying earlier?
Oh, I was just looking at Napa large formats, and I scrolled down. I noticed just before the Schaefer's and Spotswoods and Staglins and everything was Schramsberg, and there's 01 Lake Disgorged Magnum for 155, and it's an etched bottle, so it's nice and fancy. Anyway,
bid placed.
And I don't know when it was disgorged. It might have actually been not that long ago. Who knows? I'm sure the winery would tell you. You could just call them and they would let you know. But there you go.
Oh yeah,
so many deals in large formats, and especially in like California too.
The tasting notes on that 01 Schramsberg Late Disgorged are very, very positive, shall I say. By the way, speaking of sparkling, I was keeping an eye on a 1955 Perrier Jouet Reserve Cuvée Extra Dry 215. Which we talk a lot about, like, aged champagne. I know you're not as big of a fan. I do like aged champagne. Granted, I've never had aged champagne that's like 68 years old. Well,
yeah, I'm going to lose credibility if you say that I dismiss old champagne.
You don't dismiss old champagne. To be fair, Paul says after 20 years.
No, it's just that, like, they have to be, the provenance has to be solid, right? Like there's just problems with old wines. And, like, I'm speaking as somebody who works for an auction. So, it's a little bit funny, but, they are really sensitive wines, and, like, certain people are interested in oxidation. And obviously we can have a whole, 10 hours worth of discussion about styles of oxidation and in champagne production today and all these things. But there can be difficulties in expectations, I think, of wines from amazing vintages. Well, I just remember 1990, right? And I remember going to a tasting in Yountville, and a master sommelier was there who I like to, let's just say, get into it with. And one day we should have him on the program, because he totally will not remember this, because he drinks like much better wines with much higher end wine people in the biz. But he brought a 1990 Veuve Clicquot Grand Dame, Grand Dame, to this champagne tasting. It was like a holiday champagne tasting, and it was oxidized. All right, it was oxidized, and it was like, at the time it was, let's see, it was probably about 25 years old. And so I was like, yeah, I know 1990 was an amazing vintage, and you've probably had this wine like 475 times, like, and definitely many more times than I have. And you can describe it in much better detail. However, this bottle is oxidized. And I was like, I'm sorry. And he's just like, no, it's phenomenal. I'm like, no, dude, like, you drank this wine like all the time, like for days and days and days. This bottle is not great. And so I think sometimes it's hard when you want to bring something that you know is amazing, that you know you've loved, and I'm getting off topic, but that's what I do. But you know what I mean? Like, and so you're going to encounter situations, let's just say in the sort of really, really high-end wine world, where, you know, people's expectations of how the bottle should perform, especially at a tasting with a bunch of other really serious wine people, can be flawed. And it's always kind of fun to get into it with people, you know, about those things. And so I tend to encounter, you know, well, maybe it's shit. Maybe I'm just like really sensitive to oxidation. I don't know. But, you know, you will encounter that. And not that you're not supposed to, right? It's older champagne. It's going to oxidize. Like that's what happens to it. Yeah. But it gets to a point, I think, for me personally, where it falls into a realm of not really being super enjoyable. Whereas like you back off the age a little bit, like, you know, instead of 30 or 40 years, like you bracket off to 25 or 20 years, and it's a world of difference. But then maybe you don't get all those, you know, wild tertiary flavors and everything else and blah, blah, blah. So that's my spiel. But speaking of oxidization, 89 Veuve Clicquot Pensardin Brut Cave Privé, $300. Well, now I'm watching that. This is interesting because it's a late release from the winery, right? So this has been sitting in their caves, in their cave, as it were, for a long time. So you're much, much, much less likely to, you know, experience disappointment, let's just say, from a wine like that than a bottle of 89 vintage that was released, you know, however many years ago. So I mean, same thing with, you know, with late release champagnes from any number of different places, right? Yeah. Krug and all kinds of other houses hold the wines for years and years and years before they're released. Like we were talking about 08 Krug, you know, that's been, that wine was harvested quite a few years ago, but it hasn't been released, you know, for very long. So you're not going to have that kind of issue, I think, with variation and oxidation problems. Thank you for that. This is, we were planning on this being like a 20-minute podcast, but I know, right? I feel like we've gone a little bit further, and I actually cut off some of the stuff that we could talk about. So thank you so much for your time, Paul. And thank you. Look, happy bidding and happy wine buying to everyone. If you have any feedback for us, any questions, comments, concerns, anything you want us to talk about, don't hesitate to reach out. Once again, this is Paul Walker. My name is Jeff McGurn, and this has been Finally Hammered, the WineBid podcast.